The Galactic Council chamber was designed to overwhelm newcomers with its scale, but the human envoy walking across the polished crystalline floor didn't slow down to admire anything. He moved with a steady, deliberate pace, neither hurried nor hesitant, his boots tapping with a rhythm that echoed far more loudly than they should have. No one could explain why the sound carried the way it did. The acoustics didn't change. The room did. Conversations among the delegates thinned out as he approached the central dais, not because of protocol, but because something about the human's presence commanded silence long before he spoke. His name wasn't announced. Humans had stopped offering introductions after realizing most council members preferred to refer to them by species rather than by individual. He accepted the practice without protest. Stillness followed him as he reached the designated platform and stood there without lowering his gaze. There was no bow, no diplomatic posture, no elaborate greeting. Just a quiet, focused stare that left several delegates shifting in their seats, unsure why a single human could unsettle them more than any war fleet ever had. The council speaker opened the session with a series of accusations. Frontier outposts destroyed, patrols neutralized, disputed territories pushing dangerously close to conflict. Every claim presented humanity as the aggressor, and every projection implied they were moments away from destabilizing the region. Holographic displays shimmered above the chamber, each one carefully curated to paint a narrative of human ambition reborn as violence. The envoy didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. He simply watched, absorbing every word with a calm intensity that made it impossible to determine whether he was angry, amused, or entirely unmoved. The speaker mistook the calm for vulnerability. Many species did. Humans rarely raised their voices in these sessions, and their refusal to display overt emotion often gave the illusion of indecision. What the council never realized was that the stillness wasn't uncertainty, it was concentration. The envoy's hands rested loosely at his sides, but his shoulders were squared in a manner that suggested absolute readiness. His breathing slowed, chest rising and falling with controlled precision. None of the delegates recognized the shift for what it was, but their instincts reacted before their minds caught up. A predator doesn't announce its intentions. One of the predatory species noticed it first. A Korthan general, decorated with bone plates marking centuries of combat experience, leaned back in his seat as the human stare swept past him. The general's claws tapped once against the armrest before he stilled his hand, pretending the movement had been intentional. His frill rose a fraction before he forced it flat again. The council chamber's temperature hadn't changed. The sensation that it had came from something far older than logic. The speaker continued the accusations, emboldened by what he assumed was human passivity. He described the destruction of an entire survey fleet, supposedly wiped out within minutes. Several delegates glanced at the human, expecting frustration or at least visible concern. Instead, his gaze sharpened. A barely perceptible narrowing of the eyes, a micro-shift that registered in the peripheral vision of everyone watching. It wasn't threatening on its own, but it carried a weight that pressed against the subconscious, telling every instinct honed through millions of years of evolution to wake up. A subtle tension spread through the chamber. Delegates who had entered with smug confidence now found themselves sitting a little straighter. Their eyes flicked toward exits without realizing why. One species emitted a faint bioluminescent pulse along its limbs, a reflexive response triggered by sudden stress. None of them understood the cause. They only felt the growing certainty that something had changed in the air. The speaker attempted to escalate further, demanding that the human answer for alleged covert operations along the outer rim. His voice sharpened, his tone rising, trying to corner the envoy into a defensive stance. Instead, the human finally moved, but only slightly, tilting his head a few degrees, as if analyzing the speaker's words from a new angle. A tiny adjustment, almost insignificant, yet dozens of species reacted as if a shadow had passed over the chamber. The envoy spoke only one line, calm, measured, and delivered with absolute precision. "Are you sure you want the truth documented in the official record?" The room fell silent in an instant. Not because of volume. Because of tone. Every species present recognized it instinctively, even those who had never encountered humans before. The predator had just woken up. A ripple moved through the chamber after the human's quiet question. It wasn't fear yet, not fully, but something close. The speaker hesitated for the first time, glancing at his advisors as if expecting reassurance, yet none of them offered any. The human's tone had cut through the room with surgical sharpness, leaving every delegate suddenly aware of how exposed they were. There was no threat in his words, no raised voice, no dramatic gesture. The danger came from the absolute certainty behind the question. The speaker tried to regain control by projecting new holographic evidence into the chamber. It displayed ruined outposts, scorched metal, debris littering dark sectors, all arranged to suggest a trail leading back to humanity. He insisted the pattern was undeniable. He emphasized the speed of each attack, the precision of the strikes, the lack of survivors. The council murmured in agreement, relieved to focus on something familiar. Blaming humanity had always been easy. Their biology made them unpredictable, their psychology difficult to chart, their ingenuity unsettling. Yet, as the images expanded across the chamber, every delegate's attention drifted back to the human. He hadn't moved since speaking, but his posture was no longer simply calm, it had settled into something too controlled to be casual. His shoulders had lowered a fraction, aligning perfectly with his stance. His breathing had slowed even further. His eyes were focused not on the holograms but on the speaker's movements, tracking them with unwavering precision. A species known for acute sensory frills shifted uncomfortably. Its frills detected fluctuations in emotional intent, and for the first time in council history, they recorded almost nothing from the human. No anger. No anxiety. No frustration. Only complete focus. The emptiness unsettled every species with predatory instincts. A creature that feels nothing right before confrontation is either defeated or extremely dangerous, and the envoy did not look defeated. One delegate attempted to press the advantage, accusing humanity of deploying stealth units along disputed borders. He spoke with an edge, hoping to provoke a reaction that would validate their suspicions. The human turned his head slightly toward him, eyes locking with the precision of a targeting system. The delegate froze mid-sentence, his throat tightening as if invisible pressure had wrapped around it. He didn't finish his accusation. The envoy finally responded, but not with excuses or denial. His voice remained soft, even, without a hint of emotional turbulence. "You're presenting outcomes without context." The statement landed heavier than any confrontation. The council wasn't prepared for clarity delivered like a blade. Delegates who had come ready to challenge humanity found themselves leaning back, distancing instincts overriding political confidence. The few species who had hunted in their evolutionary past recognized the stance immediately. It was the posture of a predator who had already calculated distance, leverage, and escape routes. The speaker attempted to push on, but his voice wavered. He redirected attention to a projection of a destroyed Ketheri convoy, insisting humans were the only species capable of such rapid strikes. The envoy's gaze sharpened again. His pulse, if anyone had been measuring it, had slowed to a near-predatory rhythm. He analyzed the imagery without commenting, and that silence carried weight that unsettled the entire hall. A warborn species, usually fearless, shifted in its seat, claws retracting involuntarily. Their instincts screamed a warning older than logic: avoid confrontation, maintain distance, break eye contact. Yet none of them could stop watching the human, drawn to him as if gravity itself had intensified around him. When the envoy finally spoke again, the council leaned in despite themselves. "You're assuming humanity operates on your timelines. You're assuming we respond as you expect. You're assuming you understand our thresholds." He stepped forward a single pace. The movement was subtle, controlled, but it hit harder than any declaration. Several delegates tensed, muscles coiling, frills rising, bioluminescent patterns flickering involuntarily. The envoy continued, tone steady, almost clinical. "You've misread our behavior because you don't recognize what you're seeing." Silence locked the room. Every species present felt the shift even if they couldn't define it. Something ancient had surfaced in the human, an evolution-honed instinct that none of them could match. And beneath the stillness, the council realized something far worse. The human wasn't reacting to their accusations at all. He was assessing them. A tension unlike anything recorded in council history took hold as the human's focus intensified. Delegates who had spent centuries in diplomacy felt their composure slipping under the weight of his stare. He wasn't simply listening anymore. He was mapping them: expressions, breathing patterns, micro-movements, nervous pulses, subtle pheromone shifts. Every instinct in the room recognized the change. The human had moved from defensive awareness to active evaluation, and no species present had the psychological training to withstand that level of attention. The speaker attempted to restore order, insisting that humanity's actions demanded immediate accountability. But his voice trembled on the edges of each sentence. He avoided direct eye contact with the envoy, directing his words at the holograms instead. His gaze slid past the human the way prey avoids acknowledging a predator's presence, hoping invisibility might grant safety. The envoy didn't interrupt. He allowed the accusations to continue, analyzing tone, cadence, stress markers. His eyes shifted only enough to capture details without revealing anything of his own thoughts. The stillness was no longer simple calm. It had become absolute control, each breath calculated, each movement purposeful. Finally, the human spoke. "You've constructed a narrative based on assumptions. You ignored pattern inconsistencies because they didn't fit your expectations." He stepped forward again, and the impact rippled across the chamber. The motion was quiet, precise, yet it altered the room's energy like a pressure shift before a storm. Several delegates stiffened. One's limbs recoiled instinctively. Another emitted a fear pheromone without realizing it. The envoy continued in the same calm tone. "You claim we struck without warning. That is incorrect. Humans never act without cause." Delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Every word was delivered with a confidence that left no space for dispute. The envoy's posture didn't waver. His expression remained unreadable, yet the intensity behind his gaze suggested calculations running faster than any species in the chamber could follow. He looked directly at a war-hardened delegate known for surviving dozens of military campaigns. The alien's pulse spiked instantly. The envoy didn't raise his voice or alter his expression. He simply studied him. The delegate averted his gaze, unable to maintain the connection. "Your projections are missing one critical variable," the human said. "Human response is not linear. It's adaptive." The chamber fell silent. Adaptive was a term used for apex-level predators, creatures that shifted tactics mid-hunt without hesitation. Species built on instinct-driven combat recognized the implication immediately. The council speaker, however, clung to procedure, asking what the envoy meant by adaptive. The human answered without delay. "When you pressure another species, they either submit or resist. When you pressure us, something else activates. We don't escalate emotionally. We accelerate cognitively." A cold shiver moved through the chamber. Delegates adjusted their posture unconsciously, putting more distance between themselves and the envoy without standing. He kept going. "You believe the destroyed outposts indicate hostile intent. They indicate precision. They indicate someone wanted to manipulate your fears by mimicking our capabilities." The projections flickered as he spoke, suddenly appearing fractured under the weight of his analysis. Delegates reviewed the visuals with new eyes, noticing subtle discrepancies they had missed: patterns too neat, destruction too symmetrical, damage too calculated. Then the envoy revealed the part that broke whatever confidence remained. "We identified the true perpetrators before you scheduled this session." Shock spread across the chamber. The speaker tried to speak, but the human's next words overrode the attempt effortlessly. "We chose not to reveal it until your intentions became clear." The statement struck harder than any accusation. It implied surveillance, foresight, and preparation far beyond what the council imagined humanity capable of. It meant the envoy entered this chamber with a complete strategic overview while the council stumbled through assumptions. The human took one more slow breath, steady and deliberate. "And now I see your intentions clearly." Delegates felt the atmosphere constrict, as if an unseen force pressed down on every instinct they possessed. The envoy's eyes narrowed a fraction, not in anger, but in recognition. For the first time, the Council understood what was happening. The human wasn't defending humanity. He was classifying them, evaluating risks, ranking threats, and determining outcomes with the clarity of a species evolved to pursue, corner, and finish. Predator mode wasn't a metaphor. It was analysis sharpened into instinct. A hush settled over the chamber so complete that even the environmental systems seemed to quiet themselves. Delegates leaned back without realizing it, instinctively widening the distance between themselves and the human envoy. They had come prepared to challenge him with accusations, but the balance had shifted so sharply that none dared raise their voice now. The envoy didn't exploit the silence with theatrics. He simply existed within it, and that alone forced every species present into a defensive posture. He reached into the folds of his uniform and retrieved a small data module. No flourish, no dramatic movement, just a controlled deployment of information. A single gesture activated the Council's central projection system, overriding their cued evidence. The holograms shifted instantly, displaying intercepted transmissions, encoded directives, and troop movements mapped with clinical precision. None of it implicated humanity. The envoy didn't look at the images. He watched the delegates instead. "These are the genuine origins of the destruction you attributed to us. Someone engineered those attacks to provoke you." The speaker's voice faltered as he asked who would attempt such manipulation. The envoy didn't answer immediately. He allowed the question to settle among the delegates, pressing them into uncomfortable thought. Several species known for strategic intelligence scanned the displayed data, realizing too late that the patterns matched none of humanity's known capabilities. The strikes were imitations, crude mimicry designed to trigger a predictable political reaction. But humanity wasn't predictable. "We traced the source," the envoy said, "and we prepared countermeasures before your summons even reached Earth." A wave of unease rolled across the chamber. The idea that humanity had already acted without announcing their involvement was troubling enough. The implication that they had anticipated the Council's reaction was worse. The envoy's voice carried the weight of someone who didn't need validation, because every word he delivered was backed by completed analysis. Delegates who had once dismissed humans as impulsive now recognized the flaw in their perception. The envoy wasn't acting impulsively. He was acting decisively. He continued with the same unwavering calm. "You were manipulated because you expect aggression from us. Whoever orchestrated this counted on that bias." The accusation wasn't delivered with bitterness. It was delivered like a diagnosis. Cold, precise, irrefutable. The chamber responded with shifting limbs, retracting sensory frills, flickering bioluminescence, every species displaying its version of discomfort. Then the envoy stepped forward again. The movement was small, but its effect was immediate. Delegates recoiled, some visibly, others through subconscious tightening of posture. The war-born species who had mocked humans during earlier sessions now avoided looking at him altogether. "You've built entire doctrines around the assumption that humanity requires containment," the envoy said. "But containment isn't possible when the species in question understands your tactics before you commit to them." He delivered the line without aggression. That only made it more effective. Every delegate felt the truth settle like weight against their chest. Humans didn't escalate out of fear. They escalated out of assessment. The envoy raised his hand slightly, causing the projections to shift again. This time they displayed counter-operations, interceptions, neutralizations, strategic reversals carried out by human forces with such accuracy that even military species fell silent. Not a single action was wasteful. Not a single strike exceeded necessity. Everything was deliberate, almost clinical in execution. "These were defensive measures," the envoy stated, "and they were completed without civilian loss. That distinction matters to us." He let the implications stand. Humanity wasn't reckless. They were efficient. A veteran general known for leading ruthless campaigns swallowed hard, mandibles twitching with involuntary recognition. The human wasn't showing strength to intimidate them. He was simply revealing what humanity looked like when operating at full strategic clarity. The envoy ended with a final statement, delivered as calmly as the first words he spoke that day. "You believe we're unpredictable because you judge us through your instincts. But unpredictability isn't our nature. Precision is." The chamber held its breath. And for the first time, the council understood the truth. Humanity never needed to roar to dominate. Their silence was enough. The chamber remained frozen long after the last projection faded. Delegates who had entered ready to condemn humanity now struggled to steady their breathing. Their instincts insisted on distance, yet there was nowhere to retreat. The human envoy stood alone on the central platform, not triumphant, not hostile, simply certain. That certainty was what unsettled them most. It was the expression of a species that never acted without understanding the entire field. The speaker attempted to speak but cleared his throat twice before any sound emerged. His voice lacked its former confidence. He asked what humanity intended next, careful to phrase the question without accusation. The envoy regarded him with the same steady focus he had maintained since the session began. "What we intend," he said, "is stability. What you attempted to assign to us was chaos created by someone else. You reacted exactly as they anticipated." His words weren't angry. They were diagnostic, like a surgeon explaining the source of an infection. Several delegates lowered their eyes, absorbing the blow. The realization that they had been manipulated so easily struck harder than any military threat. The envoy allowed a brief silence to stretch before continuing. "Humanity has no interest in expanding your conflicts. But we will not accept being framed for actions we did not commit." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request for forgiveness. It was a position, immovable and rational. He placed the data module on the Council's central interface. "You now have the complete record of what happened. You'll find every claim against us disproven. You will also find evidence identifying the faction responsible for the attacks." Delegates leaned forward, drawn by a mix of dread and necessity. The data was undeniable. The patterns matched none of humanity's known vectors but aligned perfectly with a rival bloc seeking to weaken human alliances. Their intention had been simple: provoke the Council into isolating Earth. But their plan had collapsed the moment the envoy entered the chamber, and began unraveling it with surgical precision. The speaker's voice cracked as he asked what the Council must do. The envoy didn't hesitate. "You will retract the accusations. Publicly. You will cease border pressure campaigns. And you will establish joint investigations before citing humanity in any future incident. No threats. No ultimatums disguised as diplomacy. Just terms stated with unwavering clarity." Delegates looked at one another, silently acknowledging the truth: they had no leverage. Not because humanity held overwhelming military force, but because the envoy had stripped away every assumption they relied on. The vote began without ceremony. One by one, species announced agreement. Some spoke quickly just to regain composure. Others hesitated, not out of resistance, but because saying the words felt like conceding far more than policy. When the final tally appeared, the result was unanimous. The Council formally apologized. The envoy accepted with a single nod. There was no smugness in his stance, no victorious shift in posture. He simply acknowledged the decision as if it were the expected outcome once clarity replaced fear-driven assumptions. Delegates felt shame in that calm acceptance. It reminded them that humanity had navigated the entire confrontation without raising its voice or making a single threat. As he prepared to leave, the envoy paused and surveyed the chamber one final time. His gaze was steady, sharp, evaluating with the same intensity that had silenced the room earlier. Delegates stiffened under the weight of it, each feeling as if their entire civilization had just been assessed in a moment. "You witnessed something today you were never meant to provoke," he said softly. "Humans prefer peace. But when forced to analyze threats, our instincts sharpen. We don't posture. We don't escalate theatrically. We calculate." A tremor moved through the chamber. Not fear, recognition. The envoy walked toward the exit with the same controlled pace he had entered with. As the doors closed behind him, the oppressive tension lifted so abruptly that several delegates exhaled in unison. The chamber's ambient systems hummed back to normal, but the psychological imprint remained. A senior delegate finally broke the silence. His voice was barely above a whisper. "We saw it. Whatever they call that state, it wasn't aggression." Another replied, shaken. "No. It was evolution." A third, trembling, added the words that would echo through the council for generations. "That was humanity's predator mode. And every species present knew they never wanted to trigger it again."